of how much value makes it less painful for people to pay for the services that you render. Okay, we're moving on to the next and the last panel session for today, which is on harnessing the power of AI, building a collaborative and innovative ecosystem for Nigeria's future. To moderate this panel, let's make welcome Akintunde Babatunde, Program Director, CGID, as he makes his way up on stage. The speakers in this panel, he will be introducing them. Thank you. Another round of applause, please.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for staying through to the end, the last panel. And we are bringing everything together to see the way forward for the conversation we've been having on AI since morning. So to be on this panel, to join me first would be Nkem Agunwa, the Africa Program Manager at Witness. A round of applause for her, please, as she makes up the word. Then to join me again is Ajakore Temitayo Fausat from GIZ. Yes. Then Dr. Yetunde Anibaba from Lagos Business School. She will be joining online. I think she's, can you please clap for her? She's online. And finally would be Dr. Adekemi Omotubora, the Nigeria lead expert on the implementation of UNESCO's AI readiness assessment methodology. Okay. Right. So we have been talking about AI, and there's been a lot of questions about developing a framework, about ethics and all. But the point really is that cannot be done by a single entity, and it cannot be done by a single industry. It has to be collaborative, and it has to be within a lot of stakeholders. You know, the IMF's ranking on AI preparedness index, you know, highlights, you know, a lot of countries. And at the moment, Nigeria is categorized as significantly underprepared for artificial intelligence. And that ranking sort of like, you know, reflect a lot of underlying challenges that Nigeria, and by extension Africa, are only about a few countries in Africa, you know, pretty much on a better ranking. So what we wanted to talk about on this panel is to look at, you know, AI penetration, how do we develop proper frameworks and look at the human rights perspective. That's what Nkem is going to help us look at. Dr. Adekemi has been working on UNESCO methodology and will help us, you know, with a lot of, you know, insight from that lens. She's also from the UNILAG, who would give us perspective as, you know, from that lens. And then Temitayo would also help us from that civil society, international cooperation, you know, standpoint. And then Dr. Anibaba would also speak from that perspective, you know, what the Lagos Business School has been doing, and then we would see how we can sync all of this together on how, you know, AI, artificial intelligence will benefit everyone. So let me put this question to Nkem and talk generally about, you know, human rights. So there are a lot of human rights conversations and implications, you know, with AI that everybody has been talking about. So I was just going to ask about your perspective. What do you think, and what should be the way forward in ensuring that, you know, the human rights perspectives are, you know, covered when we talk about AI deployment in across the sectors?
Thank you so much, Akintunde, and hello everyone. Good afternoon. It's really good to be here and to be part of this conversation and to be in a panel with all women. That is a first for me. So please, a round of applause for that, please. Because when the conversation is happening around AI, around tech, often women are not as represented as they should. So this is kudos to CGID for making this happen. The ranking that you referenced, I think for most of us, when we saw that ranking, it was like, well, it's true. Nigeria is not as prepared as we should be. But I also think that that also presents an opportunity for us. So we are able to look at what others are doing and some of the mistakes that others have made as well, and to ensure that we're able to do it in a way that we're informed by what others have done and we can learn from what others have done. So what am I saying? When we think of AI, it goes without saying there is a direct human rights implication to it. We're looking at mass surveillance at an unprecedented scale. We're looking at the invasion of the right to privacy. We are also looking at identity theft and how that can be done more seamlessly. We're also seeing the scourge of misinformation and disinformation and how AI has proliferated it. The ease to create content that targets people on the basis of the agenda is at an all-time high. We also see how underrepresented communities are disproportionately impacted and targeted by disinformation in very sensitive times, during elections, during conflict. So the implication of the mass penetration and adaptation of AI it could be described as negative in certain areas, but there are also opportunities. And I think that when we're talking about opportunities from the Nigerian perspective, we have to start looking at regulation. What should regulation look like? And how do we ensure that at the time we start having conversations around regulation, it is centered around human rights? So when I say regulation, I'm looking at transparency. I'm also looking at what accountability should look like. Not just on the part of the content creators who are using AI to create their content, but also on the tool developers who are using large language models to create tools that are accessible to you and I, and to those who are actually creating the large language models on which the tool developers are hinging their development on. So there is a pipeline responsibility that we must have. On the regulation part, in terms of what the policy response can be, and about transparency, often when I'm part of conversations around transparency, there's always a trade-off that happens, where in order to be transparent about how AI is produced, there is the advocacy that people should disclose. And by disclosure, it might mean putting forward personal identifiable markers. So it might be put in your email address so that we can trace that this was done to you, that this was created by you. What this does is that it increases my vulnerability as a human rights defender who is using AI to perhaps create a content in order to mask my identity from targeting. So our advocacy is that right to privacy should not be the trade-off, should not be the sacrifice for transparency. We also have to look at what are the regulations around AI in the context of elections. It's the mega year of elections, so AI is really influencing how campaignings are happening. How is Nigeria preparing for the next election that's going to happen? What are the policies that we have put in place to ensure that, of course, I am not saying that people should not use AI for their campaigns, but how do you disclose? How do you inform people that you're doing this? So there's a full, it feels like there's a lot to unpack. But yes, I will yield the floor at this time.
Thanks a lot, Nkem, and I think you've touched on a lot of very important issues that we would unpack. We hope to unpack and also probably take away from here. I'll go to Dr. Adekemi. You know, pretty much you've worked on the UNESCO methodology on AI readiness. I wanted you to pretty much talk about that work, you know, the most you can. And then I would follow up with a question on, you know, the way we are preparing future leaders, you know, in classes. How are we, you know, how much of that is happening in terms of research and teaching, you know, with AI? Yeah, sure.
All right, thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me. It's because I may not get the opportunity to say this again. It's been a stimulating, you know, 3 days. This is the third day that I've been here. And, you know, with all the conversations, I was sitting there, I thought I should have come with my team, maybe. We would get a bit more data, you know, from what is going on here. Okay, so my work with the RAM is the AI Readiness Assessment methodology developed by the UNESCO. This RAM is a tool, so I'm going to be calling it RAM, you know, continuously. The RAM is a tool to implement UNESCO's recommendation on the ethics of AI. And the ethics, the recommendations themselves, they are sets of values and principles that the UNESCO, again, developed to help countries to develop, you know, responsible and ethical AI systems. So the tool is an implementation tool, if I can put it that way. And the whole idea is for us to assess the readiness of different countries based on 5 dimensions. This is the legal and regulatory dimension, the social and cultural dimension, the education and scientific dimension, economic dimension, and the technological and infrastructure dimension. So there are a number of questions, quite a heavy document in terms of the questionnaire. In terms of being a questionnaire. So there are sets of questions for each dimension. And the answer is, you know, what we used to do a kind of national AI diagnostic. We are going to write a country report on AI readiness. So that's the whole idea behind the RAM. Use these questions to assess how each country, the state of readiness based on each of these dimensions. So far, we have collected a lot of evidence. We are writing the report. We are analyzing, evaluating the report. And if you like, I can give you some insights in terms of the readiness. I mean, because the report is still being written, so it's not the full picture. But I can tell you, you know, what we are seeing. I mean, I saw a lot today, and that's what I was saying about, you know, it sort of tallies with what we have, you know. So I can tell you, for example, that there is, you know, there's a difference between how the private sector and the public sector, they're adopting, or the state of readiness. Like most of the innovations, I think, that we saw today that was demonstrated, you know, they are private sector driven. And I don't think that's very surprising, because the private sector is more open to, you know, adopting new technologies, you know, trying things out. In the public sector, again, you have different levels of, you know, understanding, readiness to adopt. You have sectors where the understanding is still, you know, barely there. You have sectors which are aware but are not really doing anything with that awareness. And you have sectors where, you know, they are thinking, we need to jump on this, we need to leverage this can be useful. So sometimes it depends on the kind of citizen-facing services or so that these sectors would offer that would determine whether this is something they want to jump on, or whether they are still waiting for some go-ahead.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Doc. I think that I would come back to you. You've actually, you know, there's an important point in there about, you know, public sector, private sector, civil society, and, you know, looking at all of that. I'll come back to you. So let me go to Dr. Anibaba. Okay. Hi, Dr. Anibaba. I think that the audio is not. Oh, okay. I'll just come back to you. Let me go to Temitayo, you know, there's a report that says about 3% of employees in Africa, you know, are, you know, AI literate. That leaves us about 97%, you know, off the tangent. And you've been doing a lot of capacity building, you know, digital across Nigeria. So I wanted you to talk about that, and you know, how can that be, you know, expanded to ensure that, because when we talk about AI readiness and talk about the dichotomy between private sector, public sector, we need more skilled AI, you know, professionals who would help us be, you know, agents and champions, you know, to sort of demystify the myth, you know, and then because there's just general reluctance to the fact that, you know, I can't use AI because it will take my job, you know, we don't want to use it, or all of those things. So I just wanted to talk about that, you know, what you've been doing and the opportunities ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I think this question is going to tie in the question from response from Nkem and also from Dr. So Nkem mentioned about policy, right? And then Dr. also mentioned about readiness. So in terms of capacity, we all know that it's also important that the policy actors that will really create the regulation also are very ready. And then how do we get them to the stage of readiness? So from the Digital Transformation Center, which is a project being implemented by GIZ and supported by EU and BMZ, which is the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, last year we started a process where we sort of, you know, look at what are the capacity needs of policy actors across the tri-sector, which is the public, private, and also the civil society in Nigeria. In Lagos, so we, you know, look at policy actors in Lagos, Kano, and Abuja, you know, what are their capacity gap? And of the top 5 was AI. So they wanted to, you know more about AI, but then we're looking at
Did you check with the media? The media?
Perhaps.
Oh, wow, okay.
In the data set. So where we're having conversation, the initial panel session, I also, you know, sort of, okay, media needs to come in. Yes. So when they mentioned AI was top 5, right? So the question was AI from what angle? Is it workplace readiness in terms of, you know, utilizing AI to improve their everyday, you know, work, or really in terms of them, you know, interacting with creating regulation and policies that really strengthens what Nigeria on the global front and also what locally? So when we're sort of, so we picked AI because, you know, it's also in the trending conversation as one of the capacity area to actually, you know, deal with. And thankfully, we have Data Science Nigeria here. So in collaboration with Data Science Nigeria, we're able to come up with a curriculum for AI for policy actors, which is looking at how do we get AI actors ready for these regulations and policies that we're talking about. Because an algorithm is as good as the data set that is trained on. Whether we like it or not, we are the source of the data sets. The conversations that we put into the models, we put into ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, used to develop, you know, tools which used to get responses, develop our news items. They all also, you know, becomes insights for the models to continue to learn and create responses for us. So with this capacity building measure, so we're able to do training of trainers for 52 institutions. So we didn't go for individuals, we went for institutions. So the plan is that by next year, these institutions now across the 5 states where we operate, then start training other policy actors in their states for this conversation. And this is our end goal. When you talk about policy creation, there's usually the design, you have validation sessions, you have awareness sessions. You will have these people in the room contributing to the standards and regulation that will guide our AI usage. And because of that, it is important that we get them ready, that they are not reactive to AI. Because when you look at AI, sometimes the risk is quite overwhelming, right? Because you then go into things around rights, privacy, transparency, bias, exclusion. But then the reward also is very large. So how do we then balance the risk and reward?
Right.
So it is important that we train these actors to be very ready to contribute positively and innovatively to this conversation when they're in the room making the policies.
Right. Thanks a lot for that. And I think that, you know, there's a lot to unpack there because of the scale of the work that you've done you know, with the policy actors. But I'll go to Dr. Anibaba. Can you hear me, ma'am? Oh, no, I can't hear you. Well, there's something with the feedback. Media?
Oh, dear.
Oh, sure. Can you speak now?
Yeah, I've been speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay, excellent.
Right,
okay.
Sure. Temitayo has actually spoke about, she talked about, you know, preparing policy actors for the future. You know, there's a report that says that the AI market in Africa was valued at about $1.2 billion and projected to reach about $16.53 billion by 2030. It also says that Africa's AI growth rate is, you know, will grow at about an annual rate of 28.3%, you know. So that means, you know, there has to be research from institutions that help us to understand, you know, people talk about risk, but we need to really understand the fear from an empirical basis. You know, it has to be from a knowledge standpoint, and that's what the Lagos Business School has been doing. So I wanted to talk about the place of research, you know, because when we talk about readiness also, we also need to understand that, you know, we have to capture what researchers are doing. Are they capturing the right data? Are they, you know, bringing out the right knowledge product to inform policy and all? So I wanted you to talk about research and what you've been doing from that standpoint at the Lagos Business School.
Thank you very much, Akintunde, and it's a pleasure to be here. Well, so let me take it first of all from the perspective of the AI collective. I'll take it from two perspectives. One from the AI collective and the second from LBS itself as an institution. From the perspective of the AI collective, I believe most of people in there know that LBS is one of the three legs of that collective. One of the things that we're working on currently is, first of all, developing a robust research agenda beyond the individual research that faculty members are starting to do, especially around AI ethics and responsible use and all of that. Right. So we're developing a robust research agenda that speaks to the specific needs that are, you know, of our context. And by our context, I speak about Nigeria and, of course, Africa. Right. So and so those kinds of the kinds of research that includes, therefore, would be, as we've all said, perhaps throughout this whole conference, the idea of responsible use. What does that look like in our context? As the lady that spoke earlier, forgive me, I didn't catch your name, said that the data that what you can do with AI is really a function of the data that informed it. And so things around algorithmic bias and how that might affect our ability to use effectively. There's also the bit of research about adoption, right? In the last conference or event I was at, which was just last week, you know, there was the issue of what drives adoption or what could or could not drive adoption. And the comment came to the effect that, well, as long as young people have music, they'll be willing to use, you know, whatever AI tools and all of that. Well, I think that is true, but I'm not sure it's that simple. I think that I have a number of young people around me that are still not using as much as you would expect that young people would, right? So I think there is also research to be done around what will drive adoption and what will drive responsible adoption, as we've all been saying, right? So at the very minimum, those two key things are key areas of research for us. Also, it is to what extent really there are organizations with multinational footprints, right, that are already using and integrating artificial intelligence, and then maybe also the small fintechs and all of that. But there are other organizations that don't have it on their radar at all. So what would it take for them, and of what use really? How do they, as it were, connect with whatever direction this is going, and how do they come to understand the value that artificial intelligence, as well as the risks, can have for them? So these are the, if you like, the three main areas that we're looking at for now, amongst other smaller areas. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Anibaba. And I would just, ask a follow-up question because when you have a lot of this work ongoing, you know, the reason why people have been, there was a media framing study that not in Nigeria, or CGID is working on a media framing study right now on how the media have been framing AI, and our preliminary work has shown that, you know, it has always been from a place of reporting international AI deployment. There's been very little on, you know, opportunities of AI, you know, so you've been seeing people talk about deepfake, disinformation, everything that would just, you know, fuel anxiety, which is interesting. So I wanted to ask, you know, what have you done, you know, what's the plan, you know, to ensure that, you know, the knowledge producers for the common man, you know, they are in tune with the kind of research from that standpoint, so that, you know, whatever, you know, people are getting in terms of our report on AI is from a knowledge perspective. What are you doing from that lens?
Excellent. Yeah, excellent question. So one of the things that we consider priority is actually setting up a knowledge hub, right? Where and that knowledge hub is supposed to operate in two main ways. One, where you know what actors are doing from the perspective of the different players in the industry, so that you're able to connect with them and, you know who's doing what in your own area and connect to them. But the other side of it is also putting out research and knowledge. We have a management hub, for instance, that was just launched recently, and part of the responsibility of that management hub is to release research and data around things like artificial intelligence, amongst other management topics, so that people can get you know, usable research, applicable research to their businesses, to their lives, to their work, around artificial intelligence and other management subjects, right? So that knowledge hub is a you know, it's a crucial imperative for us, and I hope that in the first to second quarter of next year we would have that live from the perspective of AI research. It's already live from the perspective of other kinds of research.
Right, thanks a lot. I'll come back to you. So let me just go to Nkem. You know, there's been a lot from when you spoke. There's been a lot of follow-up on your comment, but we need to really think about the role that civil society should play. You know, especially with if there's been a lot of people who say, hey, you know, they just AI is not the next thing for them because AI does not, you know, solve poverty problems. You know, people say that, you know, there are problems that are more important than, you know, us talking about AI. But do you think that's true? You know, I know that there are human rights considerations, but there are also things that civil society should do in preparing the society even for the opportunities, for the risk. So what have been done? What should be done? And at the collaborative level, how do you think it could work?
No, thanks so much for that question. And it is true. A number of actors within the civil society may not necessarily consider this priority, particularly in the global majority in Africa, Southeast Asia, where we're still grappling with the right to life, for example. You know, people are still shot at on the streets for protesting. So it doesn't feel like AI and its implication ranks. But for my organization, we recognized that AI would have direct implication to all the other rights that we're advancing, and also expand and increase the risks that we face as human rights organizations, as activists and human rights defenders. And so we started to engage in consultation. So I think that the role that civil society can play is research. We have to begin to understand how AI impacts on the work that we do, impacts on gender, for example. If you're an organization that's dealing with gender and gender issues or gender and sexual-based violence, AI introduces new forms of gender-based violence that requires a different approach to confronting it. If we're looking at even the representation of underrepresented communities, including women in the academia, you see how the articles and reports from some of the AI tools that we use are overly representative of global North scholars, right? So you begin to think of how AI continues to expand the gap of opportunities for those of us who are here and practicing in our context and those who have proximity to it. So I think that it's about framing, and I like the question that you posed to her about the media framing on AI. I think we have to start framing it differently. How does AI impact our reality, the way we live our lives on a day-to-day, and how do we document that? Because as we begin to fashion out what a suitable response would be for us, it has to be informed by empirical data. There has to be something that we can rely on and we can use as an advocacy tool. There's also a need for us to work collaboratively. What we have seen is that a lot of us are doing very good work, but we're doing it in silos. So we're replicating the same things. And
Because of funding, I guess?
Well, yes, I think funding has always been an issue, and it has been an issue since even before we both started playing in this space. So it will continue to be an issue. But we have to then ask ourselves, how do we make do with the existing resources?
Right.
So if CJID has access to research, and Witness has access to tech platforms, and we're able to work with the stakeholders there, and others have access to policymakers, etc. How do we come together and ensure that my work relies on the research by CJID, and I do not have to conduct an independent research? So we have to find ways in which we can work collaboratively, we can have data that we can work with, and provide solutions that everyone has a role to play.
Right, thank you. I mean that CGID is doing. I mean, with the collective, we are, doing that convening. I mean, this is one of such, but we are trying to bring together media, civil society together to see how we can collaboratively work on that together. But I'll go to Dr. Adekemi, and my question, I'll give a context to my question. When we talk about accountability, when we talk about big tech, because I've heard a lot of regulation in the room today, but I want us to really look at it from a place of regulation, policies, and governance. I think they are very different, but distinct terms. Because can you regulate what you don't own? In a context of the internet, you don't own the internet, so the question has always been, can you regulate what you don't own? And I know that recently in Nigeria there was a fine that the Nigerian government placed on Meta, WhatsApp, because of data privacy, a lot of, again, human rights concerns. But there was like an interesting point there, which is, so when you find Meta about $200 million, and Meta is not able to pay, whether willingly or not, or whatever.
Not able.
When I say not able,
not
I mean,
willing.
I said willing, not willing,
Not willing.
right, not willing to pay. The question would be, what would you do? Shall they leave Nigeria? And would Nigerians not go on the street and say, you are taking away our mode of communication? So what approach, to regulation from a knowledge standpoint? You've worked across what approach to regulation should we be talking about? Or should regulation not even be a conversation here, but governance? I just wanted you to help, put a little, insight on that.
Okay, it sounds like a classroom question, but I will try, right? So I choose to see governance. Actually, I say as an academic also, I call what I do 2GEI, which is governance, gender, equality, and inclusion in terms of AI and emerging technologies. So I think you want to see governance as the overarching, concept, if you permit me to use concept, as the overarching concept here. And you can have different forms of governance. You can have internal governance systems, within organizations. You can have governance, that is derived from policy, right? You can have laws, legislation. You can have ethics, the big thing that we are talking about in artificial intelligence. But all these different governance frameworks have their limitations. If you talk of internal governance, which ethical frameworks within organizations, within sectors can be part of, you can have, you know, there are limitations because, well, it's like asking somebody to please themselves. They do what they like, they can whitewash everything and say, you know, we have this set of rules, we have complied, it's our rules. That's why where you need, you know, a form of outside external governance, right? And it's, I think because we have all these conversations, these big confusing conversations around regulation, ethics, it's part of why UNESCO came up with these recommendations. And notice that, you know, the emphasis is on ethical development of AI, but it's also a recommendation. And 194 countries already agreed to implement this ethical, you know, this set of ethical values, rules. So they are framed very broadly because, you know, I see, as you were asking me, the struggle with all the terminologies we throw around: accountability, transparency, explainability, you know, and sometimes it's just a cover for people to responsibility even. So I work on projects where our big thing is responsible, and usually I tell the people that we work with, don't cajole us by saying we are doing responsible AI. What is responsible about what you are doing? How is it responsible?
Right.
So you see, those, so this, I want to emphasize again, you know, that that's the advantage of having a broad framework, right? And you have to look at the level of development, like ours, right? Before, you don't want to regulate too quickly. Regulate in the sense that you pass a law so that you don't scare everybody away and they think, why are we doing this? We are going to get into trouble, right? So you want to look at the level of development, preparedness, readiness, and then pitch the regulation at the appropriate level, you know, for that development in AI. I hope I was able to, to answer your jump question.
That's interesting. And I have a follow-up question. You know, I've seen examples of some countries in Africa, you know, planning to develop AI framework, regulatory framework, funded by big tech. And I find that interesting. You know, big tech is funding you to develop how to regulate them. And, you know, that model is interesting.
Sometimes it's whitewashing, you know. It's just, we are doing, you are not, it's like the oil, you know, when you cause oil spillage and you also want to dictate the terms on which you are going to clean up, you know, how much you are going to give. So if you look at the way that our development has progressed, you can actually see analogy, you know, with difficult developmental issues, even like this kind of technology, how there are the ways that we've always developed, and when we need to tell ourselves we need to depart from this kind of model because it's not going to work in the long run.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll go to Dr. Anibaba. I mean, a very similar question. You know, when Meta wanted to deploy the Meta AI on WhatsApp on its platforms, you know, it wasn't able to deploy it, you know, I think when it was launched, in Nigeria, Nigerians on WhatsApp were able to use it. Then I was in the UK with my friend, and I was talking about, I was like, yeah, he's not been able to use it because for regulatory reasons, Meta cannot deploy its AI model for now. But a lot of the countries, the early countries where they deployed, there was no regulatory concessions, there was nothing. It was just start to try, you know, Meta AI on WhatsApp, you know, because again, we have very, you know, lax laws. There's also a knowledge gap with, you know, policy makers at some point who respond from it, who react not from a place of knowledge, but just more like, you know, we have to regulate AI, that AI you're talking about. So I want you to talk about, you know, what do you think we can do to bridge that knowledge gap? You know, you're conducting research from the Lagos Business School. You know, CGID is doing its own. Nkem, they're doing their own. GIZ, you know, but there's no coordinated knowledge standpoint where, you know, people are able to understand. And sometimes when people get to see the report, you know, it's kind of cumbersome, clumsy, difficult for people to even understand. And policymakers are probably busy with some, you know, constituency projects who that they are not really interested in, you know, so what do you think we could do to bridge that gap?
Okay, I think you've asked many questions in one.
Yeah, you're a professor, so I hope.
Let me take it from the point of bridging the gap. You have to have policy before you can bridge the gap in terms of the knowledge about the policy, isn't it? Right. So first of all, is to advocate for such a policy. And like you said, different organizations and institutions are doing different things. And again, that is one of the reasons why there is an AI collective, even though it is only about to kick off, right? But beyond the AI collective, I think also it is from an educational standpoint, integrating these things into our curriculum is absolutely critical, right? So from in terms of university schools that are doing stuff around AI and technology in general, ensuring that these are core aspects of the curriculum. So for LPS, for example, our ethics course has always had things around responsible AI and other emerging trends as part of the curriculum, right? So that addresses that. But then beyond that also, over the course of the next few months, there are going to be policy roundtables and private sector roundtables around AI and responsible use of AI. Right. And so those are ways that we are trying to do that from a private sector perspective. But I do think that, first of all, we do have to have a policy before we talk about bridging the gap in terms of the knowledge of the policy. And I'm not sure that is very, I mean, the policies are not particularly, addressing AI. There's the Data Protection Act and all of those things, but they're not necessarily directly addressing responsible use of AI.
Right. Thanks a lot. And how are you preparing future leaders? I mean, talent to drive the AI conversation. How are you doing that at the business school?
So one of the things that readily comes to mind, we're launching we've already launched it. We're starting a Masters in Management program, for example, in January. And one of the core specializations there is digital transformation, and that includes everything from artificial intelligence, all of the R's, AR, XR, all of that, everything around digital transformation that forms one of the specializations. So at that level, there is that. There are also executive development programs that we're deploying next in 2025. There are all kinds of programs that we're doing around it. We're under the AI Collective. We're going to have a national conference. And that's supposed to happen, I think, once every couple of years or something like that, bringing together the different actors and players in this space to just ensure that we're constantly building knowledge and skills around it. We're doing stuff around capacity building for educators. Yeah, because I think that's similar to what you said about train the trainers. Right. But, I think that's probably one way to do this in a mass market kind of way. Train people that will train other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anibaba. I will just go to Temitayo there. You've started this very interesting program in about 5 states. 5 states. There are 36 states and the FCT. So what is happening there? How do you plan to scale that, across the state so that we don't have a divide, in the level of adoption?
Okay, so we are a project, right? And when you're implementing a project, you need to also consider your operational cost and then also look at capacity.
Right.
So hence why we actually adopted a TOTM approach for the 5 states. So we're not going into the 5 that we're currently working in as a project.
Right.
We're actually going through institutions in the states.
Right.
So it is the hope that, just like we did for data protection, because also in December, with D4D Hub, that's an EU project also, we trained data processor controllers also in Nigeria across the tri-sector. So what we're then doing after the training is to have an online module.
Again, no media.
So that's why I said I already picked something interesting from today, so don't worry, you will be getting an invitation on it. So we're translating the data protection curriculum into a self-paced online model that then just run across innovation actor, public sector, private sector, civil society, everybody, media and everybody. So anyone can pick up, go to the platform and then learn. That is the plan for. So now also for these, the more we, remember these are pilots, right?
Right.
So we need the institutions in the states from next year to also start training. Start, doing the AI literacy in their states. Then from the learning, we can then now see what exactly is the need for an online version.
Right.
Do we already have such curriculum? Can we build on existing ones? Or do we just make existing one much more accessible?
Right.
So yes, we'll take the learning and then go from there.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Now I'll open this up for questions from the audience. So, okay, there's 1, 2. Then I'll come back to see if I can get questions. Yeah.
Hello, thank you everyone. My name is Jemilat Nasiru. I'm a journalist with the cable newspaper. So since we started the conversations around AI, we've been hearing a lot of technical terms, jargons, and I'm even sure that even though a lot of us in this room can term ourselves as elite, there are some terms that we do not really understand. So, and I think that we may be catching the AI knowledge fever late, just as we did with climate change in our educational curriculum. So while we are talking about stakeholders, are there any efforts or any collaborations to take AI knowledge down to our secondary schools, probably even the primary schools, so that when we, in the next few years, we don't have students that are at our level and do not, and fall into the same position that we are. That is like taking AI knowledge.
Got a question.
Curriculum.
That's fine.
Yes.
Thank you. The second, that's him at the back. The gentleman at the back.
Okay, good afternoon all. My name is Abdul Latif Mohammed. I am a lecturer with Nile University of Nigeria. Just a response to what the moderator has said. In terms of research, especially on media framing, we are not quiet. We actually just published an article on that titled Friends or Foe, Exploring the Media Framing of Artificial Intelligence in Africa-Focused Journalism. So we're actually working on that, and more works are in the pipeline. One of the findings from our work is that while we celebrate this phenomenon, we are also, this celebration is altered by some concerns, such as, concerns about the ethics of using these technologies, as well as something else that has been, ongoing in discussion we have so far, the influence of big tech in the African media industry. So one of the major concerns that we saw from our analysis of these articles was that some of the authors were concerned about how we leverage most of this foreign AI-developed system, and because they are foreign, there are issues surrounding things like data sovereignty, for example. Right? There's one, and then another thing is unrepresentativeness of these models, language, expressions, history, philosophy. They are missing. And lastly, we also did an analysis of the predominantly quoted sources.
Where can the audience find that research?
Good. So it also relates to the questions that were being asked yesterday. So if you're doing science journalism, I think you need to find the science database. And the science database that you, as a journalist, can access to get quality publications are Web of Science, Scopus databases.
Are those
so you can be sure that,
are these free to access?
Of course, we have tools for you to refine the free versions.
Great stuff there. I mean, thanks for that.
And we are open for collaboration.
I mean, that's why we are here. So I think that during lunch we'll come around to you. But I think that that's really not a question. It's a contribution.
It's a comment.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. So I think I will just allow for one more question.
Thank you very much. My name is Ajibola Hamzat. I'm the African editor for Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism. My question is to the prof. I would like to find out, because we've been talking about regulations and laws, and what I have not heard is about the enforcement, because the enforcement is always the issue. There are several laws, there are several policies, and at international level, at local level. But how should the enforcement of those regulations and law, how should they look like? Right. That's my question.
Thank you very much. I think, how do we streamline AI literacy to young kids, at the curriculum level? Then I think the second question about the enforcement of AI laws and regulations, that should be to, anyone can take it. Dr. Anibaba, I would also get you to speak on that.
Okay, thanks very much for the question. So regarding, taking AI to, education level like the primary and secondary schools, I can say what we have been doing. We have a lab at the University of Lagos. We have a lab, an AI lab, and we have the Edu AI hub. That's what we call it. So it's an education AI hub. And part of the work we do is that we are going to schools, different schools in Lagos, to actually talk to students about AI, find out what they know, how they are using it, get them engaged in that. We are hoping that we can scale this and we can do more, in terms of, getting the students even more involved to, for example, the lab, do some practical, exposure to actually developing some systems. Right. But we are working on that. And I think the enforcement one is for me as well. So I think that for AI, to get to the level of enforcement, I don't even know if we are there yet, because we are still trying to figure out actually what's the regulatory approach that is going to work. Right. So when we scale that hurdle, then we will talk about enforcement.
Right, thank you. Nkem, do you have some comments on any of the questions?
Well, not on the questions, but I believe we're wrapping up now, and I have some final words. And I know I started off with regulation and policy framework, but I really just want to say that regulation is not a magic bullet. So we shouldn't think of regulation as the end-all, be-all. It is necessary, but there are other responses that must complement regulation. When we also think about, and another thing that we as civil society can do is to stay engaged. The regulations would most likely happen. But if we remember the Anti-Social Media Bill, we remember the Cyber Crimes Act, we know that these regulations often come at a cost to impede some other rights, including the rights of freedom of expression, for example. So civil society has to stay alert. We have to continue to engage with the policymakers to ensure that we feed into those deliberations so that human rights considerations are centered. Can we regulate what we do not own? One thing we can leverage is the African Union. I know in 2021, the African Union passed a resolution on AI, and I think that is still a body that we can continue to engage and do what we can call collective bargaining. What should the regulation be for Africa as a bloc, right? So that we're not constantly at the back foot. And then finally, on how do we mainstream these policies? Media literacy is still integral. And this is where the media plays a key role. And the media must be considered as a core stakeholder in whatever the engagements might be. Because an informed population would inform policy. If we want to push certain policies, we want to push regulation, we also need the buy-in of the majority of the population. So media literacy is an integral part that we all should play a role, particularly the media.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nkem. Dr. Anibaba, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, please, the questions.
Yeah, on the education part of it, I think that Dr. Adekemi started to speak to it. But in addition to that, is just making sure that our curricula across board, right, are infused with the right kind of content. Again, it's one of the things that we're supposed to be working on. But I think that if regulation is supposed to protect perhaps the most important form of protection is actually knowledge and understanding how these things work, right? Because there is only so much you can do as far as it were, catching defaulters is concerned. So it's probably best to focus on educating the population. Yes, I think that I've answered those two together in terms of the education and the regulation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Temitayo?
I'll respond to the first one, right, to just close out. I think we need to accept two truths. AI is currently a very technical terrain. That's fact. And secondly, also, it actually takes time for us to change our curriculum, particularly at the primary and secondary level, even to the tertiary institution. So what can we do? I think what we'll benefit from is to take learning from Web3. So if you look at 5 years ago, if somebody tell you liquidity, gas fee, you're like, okay, what are you talking about? But people in Web3 actually take the effort to start looking at what are our current everyday mental model in Web 2 that looks like Web 3 and start explaining. When I say gas fee, I mean transaction fee, although the model is quite different because it's time bound, right? So everybody in this room, we need to start taking that effort to start looking at how do we explain these technical terms in much more simpler everyday reality that we are used to. Why not also while losing the meaning? For the curriculum part, our realities are reality, right? We hope it changes. But then what we can do right now is to look at non-governmental based learning frameworks or platforms. An example is the Nigeria Learning Passport by UNICEF, which is being used in Lagos schools, where they take things that children learn in the classroom and just, something like lesson and explain it much more simpler for them. So we can look at creating a simpler form of AI curriculum and be integrating them in those sort of platforms. I believe that's a faster model that we can use to get AI learning or literacy to our primary and secondary school level students before our standard curriculum catches up. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. And I think that at this point, it is to say thank you to Dr. Yetunde Anibaba of the Lagos Business School. To say thank you to Nkem, our Africa Program Manager at Witness, Ajakore Temitayo from GIZ, Dr. Adekemi Omotubora from the Nigerian lead expert on the implementation of UNESCO's RAM. Just to say that at CJID, this is one of our work, one of our efforts to make sure that we bring AI knowledge to stakeholders. You've seen what we have done in the technical tool development with the fellows. We are also launching AI journalism fellowship, for Nigerian journalists in January, where you will get to learn everything AI, so that it won't be jargon anymore. We are also tomorrow next. We are working with the ACSPN, with lecturers of journalism, mass communication from about 26 schools, tomorrow and next on AI, again, to think about mainstreaming AI into curriculum, bringing that together and all. So, things are going. We are trying to see how best we can mainstream these and get, things to work generally. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for engaging, staying true, and this is the end of the session.
Thank you so much.